What's the most messed up thing someone has ever told you after barely knowing them? Well, I'm gonna go first. So in high school, I would take public transportation back home. Well, this one lady got on a bus with her daughter and sat next to me. I looked over and told her that her daughter looked very pretty. Then out of nowhere, she just starts crying. I asked, "Ma'am, are you alright?" And she says, "It's my husband." I didn't want to be invasive, but I asked, "Did something happen?" Then she goes on a 10-minute rant about how abusive her husband was and that she tried to stay for the baby. She was scared, but she finally had the courage to go. I felt bad and asked her, "Is there anything I could do to help?" And she proceeds to tell me that everything is fine. I'm like, "Are you sure?" She replies, "Yes, everything is fine. He had a peanut allergy and he died last week." And I'm like shook. And I said, "I'm so sorry for your loss." And she responds, No, it's better that he's gone anyway." And I'm like, huh? Right after, she prepares to get off the bus and she grabs her daughter. I said bye. Right before she gets off, she said she put peanuts in his food. Story time on how I found out I was adopted. So growing up, I felt so different from my family, and the treatment was off as well. So my mom is white and my dad is black. And my brother and sisters are all biracial, and at the time, I thought I was too. My older brother and sister were both light-skinned, they had light eyes, they had curly or wavy hair, and same thing for my little sister. But she honestly looked like a white girl. I mean, if you would straighten her hair, you would have thought that she was just white. And she looked more like my mom than anything. But me, on the other hand, I turned out completely different. I forgot to mention, but my dad is light-skinned as well. I was dark-skinned, I had the regular dark brown eyes, and my hair was extremely kinky. And I recently found out that I have 4B hair. And I never understood how I turned out this way, and the rest of my family was light-skinned. I don't know, I just sometimes felt like I didn't belong in the family, and I wasn't pretty enough. And I definitely sensed something was off because my grandmas and aunts and uncles treated me way different. And I could tell I wasn't their favorite. Sorry I went on a rant, but if you want to know how I found out, come back for part 2. This is part 2 on how I found out I was adopted. So, like I said earlier, I look completely different from my family. Mom's white, dad is black. Anyway, so the day I found out. So, one time in class, we were doing Punnett squares. And at the time, I was in 8th grade. We did Punnett squares with our parents, height, hair, skin, eyes, everything. But my Punnett squares weren't adding up. Like, I didn't get the traits that I'm supposed to have. So, that day after school, I showed my mom the Punnett squares. And my mom said that they weren't accurate and that the Punnett squares aren't a real thing. So I just went on with life again, just thinking that it was fake and that the Punnett square theory was wrong. Then a week later, I went back to school and showed my friends, and I told them, and they said that the Punnett squares were accurate. Then one of them laughed and said, "You must be adopted or something." And when she said that, literally my whole world clicked. Sorry, but it's literally so much to the story. You're going to have to come back for part 3 on how I even asked my parents how I was adopted or if I was adopted. So, sorry. This is part 3 on how I found out I was adopted. So one of my friends said that I must be adopted, and like for a whole month, it was just sitting on me to ask my parents if I was. I was kind of scared because I didn't want to believe that I was actually adopted, but everything was starting to add up from how I looked to how my family treated me, and it's always just been so weird. So one night we were having like a family movie night, and I started crying in the middle of the movie. My dad had paused the movie and asked what was wrong, and I finally asked what's been bothering me. Am I adopted? And my mom looked over to me, and from that look, I could just tell. A couple days later, my parents sat me down and talked about it, told me I was from Kenya, told me about my real mom, and just things that I wish I should have known sooner. Because most of my life, I was questioning my existence. But now I'm 43 years old. I was able to find 2 sisters I had. They were both older than me, and they were also adopted. But I never got to meet my real mom because she passed away before I could meet her. But I'm glad to have met the sisters that I have. Story time on how I found out my dad was transgender. Also, by the way, at the time, I was 12. So I grew up an only child. I always wanted siblings, but my parents said that I was enough. And we would never really go see family like my grandparents. When I was a toddler, I used to see them. Well, at least that's what my parents told me. But I was never close with any of my family besides my one aunt. So one day I had a sleepover, and I invited my friend, and we played hide and seek. And I spent like 10 minutes looking for her until I finally found her in my basement holding a book. I was like, "Girl, I'm done playing with you." And she said she found an old picture book. When she told me, I was kind of excited because I haven't seen much of my family. As we went through the book, I saw a picture of my grandparents and 2 little girls. One of the girls in the picture I knew was my aunt because of the mole, but I didn't know who the other girl was. I flipped the picture around and it said familia, which by the way is family in Spanish. And I was like, so there's another aunt that I don't know about? But If you want to know how I confronted my dad about it, come back for part 2. This is part 2 on how I found out my dad was transgender. So, like I said, I found a picture of my dad's family, but he wasn't in it. That night, I went to my parents' bedroom and I saw my mom. I showed her the picture and she gasped. I asked, do I have another aunt and where's dad? She told me to sit down and that they wanted to tell her, but they wanted to wait at an age where they think I'd understand. So, a couple minutes later, my dad walked in and I asked, who's this girl? He sat next to me, held my shoulders and said that was him. And I started laughing at first because I was like, you're not a little girl. And he responded, at that time, that was me. And from there, he just told me everything. To when he finally transitioned, he talked about how unaccepting my grandparents were, which is partially why I really don't go see them. After everything my dad told me, I just sat there and cried for him. And my mom and dad both held me and told me everything was going to be fine. It's been 9 years and I have so much more respect for my dad, no matter what anyone thinks.
Talking about how I found out my sister was actually my mom. My parents were much more older than me, and I always felt more distant from them than any of my siblings. I'm 17 years old. I grew with a big family. I have 5 siblings. My sister is 30, brother 29, another brother that's 29, and both of my sisters are 24 and 22. I always realized there was a big gap between me and the rest of them. I always figured that maybe I was an accident or unplanned. Being the youngest, I was spoiled all of the time. The way they treated me is how you would expect them to treat the youngest. My older sister Hannah always took care of me the best. I always saw her as a mother figure, never knowing that she was actually my real mom. She spent most of her time with me more than my other brothers and sisters. And she often took care of me when my mom wasn't there. And my parents were much more older than me, so I always felt like there was a distance between us. I ended up finding out Hannah was my mom after both of my parents passed away. If you want to know exactly how I found out, please come back for part 2. Part 2 on how I found out my sister was actually my mom. When my father passed away, it was probably the worst part of my life. I was 8 years old. I did not take it well at all. I cried for weeks and I went crazy. I threw fits at people. I know my siblings were all going through this just as bad as I was, but I made it all about me. I didn't consider them or what they had been going through the whole time. And recently, the same thing happened to my mom. It hit me just as hard, if not harder. She'd been sick for a long time and slowly getting worse. I wasn't ready for it at all. It was after this Hannah told me the truth. She sat me down and braced me that what she was about to tell me, I would be shocked. She knew that we all were still recovering from my mother's passing, but a few weeks had passed and she felt like it was enough time to wait before actually coming out with the truth. Sorry, I can't do 3-minute long videos, but come back for part 3 if you want to know exactly how she explained that she was my mom. So, part 3 on how I found out my sister was actually my mom. She said she always wanted to tell me, and only now she could finally. When she was 13, as many stupid kids do, she had unprotected ex with a boy, and she had got pregnant, and that child was me. At the time, her parents wanted to give her baby up for adoption, but she was unshakable and wanted to keep her child. She completely refused to give me away. They eventually agreed to keep me and would raise me in their household, but with their parents as the guardians. And I would grow up thinking that they were my real parents. Apparently, some of my older siblings also knew, but they never mentioned it. In fact, they're actually my aunts and uncles. My mother made Hannah swear that she would never tell me, and that she could only tell me only after some time after her death. She said she wanted to die as a mother, not a grandmother. Hannah said all my life she wanted to tell me, but swore not to. And she was glad that she was able to tell me the truth. But if you want to know how I reacted to the whole situation, part 4 coming up.
Storytime about the guy who pretended to be transgender to get into the girl's bathroom. So we're going to go ahead and call him Danny. And at the time, I knew of Danny, but I didn't really know him. We weren't friends or nothing like that. Danny was known as the gay guy. He would always have his makeup done, and he would hang out with some of the girls. Everything was fine and cool until we entered our junior year and Danny came out as transgender. He started wearing wigs and dressing more feminine-like. Now, when he would get dressed up, he would look completely different than what he looked like as his, born male self. You would think that he was a different person when he would get dressed up. Well, one particular day, he didn't get dressed up and he entered the girls' bathroom. When he did that, all of a sudden, it was a big group of girls running out of the bathroom screaming. If you guys want to know why they ran out, come back for part 2. This is part 2 of the guy that pretended to be transgender to get into the girls' bathroom. So, like I said before, junior year was the year Danny came out as transgender. Some days he'd get dressed up, some days he didn't. When he entered the girls' bathroom, a group of girls ran out of the bathroom screaming. I think maybe a couple hours later, after lunch, Danny was called to the office, and rumors went around about Danny trying to look through the girls' stalls. One girl claimed that he was peeking through the stall to look at one of her friends, and Danny was suspended. I think 2 weeks later, Danny came back to school, and she completely stopped wearing feminine-type outfits. That same week, me and my friend Kenneth were walking past the boys' bathroom, and we heard a lot of fumbling going on. I told him to go check what was going on. When he checked, there was a group of guys in the bathroom jumping Danny. I'm running out of time. Come back for part 3. Part 3 of the guy that pretended to be transgender to get into the girls' bathroom. So, like I said earlier, Danny was in the bathroom and he was getting jumped by a group of guys. After it was over, he walked out last and he walked over to his locker. So I followed him to see if he was okay, and he had a black eye and his lip was busted. I asked him if he wanted me to walk him to the nurse and why did they even jump him. Danny replied, "The guy said I'm not allowed into their bathrooms anymore. He said anytime he ever entered there, he'd get bullied or teased for being gay." Then I asked him, "I thought you were transgender." He said that because he didn't want to go into the guys' bathrooms anymore. I said, "What about the incident about you peeking through the girls' stalls?" He said, "I never looked through any of the girls' stall. I was just seeing to see who was in the bathroom so I could go in." He said, "I'm gay, I don't even like girls, and it wasn't my intentions to make anyone uncomfortable." Come back for part 4. When I was younger, I grew up with a cut on my face. It went down from my cheekbone all the way down to my neck. It was very long, the longest cut anyone has ever seen. When I was in school, teachers and students would ask, how did I get that cut, or if it still hurt? I would tell them it didn't hurt, but I didn't know where the cut came from. My mom actually told me I was born with it. Some teachers would say, that doesn't look like a cut you were born with. I think when I got a little older to understand, I asked my mom again, how did I get this cut on my face? She'd say, as usual, you were born with it. But I don't know, I just had a feeling there was something she wasn't telling me. If I could, I asked my dad, but my mom told me that he passed away a couple weeks after I was born. When I turned 18, I finally went to the dermatologist to see what was up with this cut. They told me the cut looked as though someone cut me with a sharp object. Later that week, I went to my aunt's house and told her about my dermatologist visit. She broke down in tears and started apologizing. Come back for part 2. So after going to the dermatologist about the cut I had on my face my entire life, I went to my aunt about it and she broke down and cried. She apologized and told me that I needed to speak to my mom. She said she thought it would be best if she told me. So I went home a bit confused and I talked to my mom. I told her the dermatologist told me the cut on my face wasn't from something I was born with. My mom looked at me and said, I never told you because I didn't want you to feel bad about this family, your father, but when you were 3 weeks old, your dad did this to you. I said, what? What do you mean? He did this to me? Why? She replied, your dad was really sick. I cried and asked, why would he do this? She looked at me and said that he tried to get rid of you. We couldn't afford to take care of you. But I pushed him off of you before he could have did anything. She said my aunt had called the police. My mom and dad were fighting and they shot him and he died that day. There was a girl named Jessica Phillips that went missing in my high school. She went missing in the middle of our junior year. When her parents came out about it, the school put posters up everywhere, alerts on the news. 2 weeks later, they decorated her locker. Ever so often, I see her closest friend weeping during class, and the teachers would excuse them out. The devotion of love she was getting after she went missing was outstanding. But the thing is, no one liked Jessica. Actually, everyone hated her. Don't get me wrong, she was the most popular girl in school, but she was an asshole. She was very nasty and rude and did anything to get what she wanted. I heard she once gave this boy Ronnie peanuts for not doing her homework anymore. He wanted to get into sports and didn't have time for it, and he was allergic to peanuts. The girl was practically a bully. Her friends were all followers that secretly hated her but wanted to be her. But it's crazy to see them all crying over her whereabouts when they all wanted her gone. But I know why she went missing. Come back for part 2. Jessica going missing didn't faze me. Actually, the days felt lighter when she wasn't there. Yeah, she was the talk of the town for weeks, but I'd rather that than to actually see her. And I know some might say I'm heartless, but Jessica did it to herself. So the night of Nicole's birthday party is when it all started. Nicole and Jessica were like frenemies. I mean, they were friends, but they were always in competition with each other. I'd say Nicole was the second popular girl in school. She was the first, but she dropped to second because she lost her boyfriend Luke to Jessica. He cheated on her with Jessica. I can say that's when the war started. Anyways, the night of Nicole's party, Jessica wasn't invited. I remember overhearing her during lunch that she was going to plan to crash and ruin Nicole's party. Pretty devious if you ask me. So the night comes and I go to Nicole's party. An hour goes by and I take a step outside of the side of the house to get some fresh air. I see Jessica creeping from the back. I say, "Jessica, is that you?" She looks at me and before I know it, someone grabs her face and pulls her into the bushes. So the night Jessica went missing, I saw exactly what happened. She tried to sneak into Nicole's party, but she actually didn't get in. Not only because she wasn't invited, but she had got pulled into the bushes. When I ran to see where she was pulled, she was dragged by 2 guys into the streets. I was in shock and I stood there for a few seconds, but those few seconds, Jessica saw me. She screamed for me to help her, but I just stood there. They threw her into a car and drove off. I went back to the party as though nothing happened. After the party was over, I went back home and I kept replaying what happened over and over. Then that next Wednesday is when everyone started hearing about Jessica going missing. They said if anyone ever saw anything to come forward, but I decided not to. There were moments throughout the week where I felt like I should say something, but there were times that I felt like it was too late. I thought maybe she was dead by now and it'd be pointless for me to come out now. But everything changed when I got a message from a block number saying, "Why didn't you save me?" Time on how I found out my dad had a whole nother family through social media. I'm talking wife and kids. Okay, so my mom and dad met when I was 3, but I could always recall him always being there in my life, so technically he's my stepdad. They got married, and then 2 years later, my sister was born, and another 3 years, my twin brothers Trey and Tyrese. On my 17th birthday is when everything came out. Around that time, my mom was 4 months pregnant, and I had posted a picture on MySpace of me and my family at my birthday dinner. Also, I forgot to mention, I wasn't even allowed to have social media. I didn't even have a phone, but I had a computer, but my parents didn't know I had a MySpace account. I think maybe a week after the post, I get a comment from a random person under the name of Sunshine. They say, "Hey, that's my dad. Are you his cousin or niece? We should talk." The profile pic was a picture of flowers. When I saw the comment, I was a little weirded out, but come back for part 2 if you really want to know what I did afterwards. Part 2 on how I found out my dad had a whole nother family through social media. So I posted my birthday picture. A week later, I get a comment saying, "Hey, that's my dad. Are you his cousin or niece? We should talk." Me being the investigator that I am, I went through the page, but they really had no pictures, nothing, just pictures of flowers. So I started thinking maybe they probably meant to put that underneath somebody else's post. 2 months go by and I make another post for Mother's Day. It's a pic of me and my mom and my dad in the corner photobombing. Within 5 minutes of the post, I get another comment from that Sunshine account saying, "I think we might be cousins." I was a bit suspicious about the account, so I went to my friends about it. When I showed my friend Deja, she said, "Ignore it because if you show your parents, they'll probably take your computer away because you have a MySpace account." My other friend Alice said maybe y'all could be related, so you should reach out to the page. Later that night, I was feeling very anxious, so I messaged that account, and you're not even going to believe what they told me. Come back for part 3. Part 3 on how I found out my dad had a whole nother family through social media. So I messaged that fake Sunshine account and asked why did they keep making those comments underneath my post. They messaged back 2 hours later saying you were posting pictures of my dad. I responded back, "No, that's my dad." Then they sent me a picture of a girl with my dad. I was like, "Who's that other girl?" They responded, "Me." I was like, "No, you're a fake page." And she responded with another picture, but with my dad and a whole nother woman and 3 kids, including the girl. When I saw that, I shut my computer down, and later that day, I went to my friends to show them. They were so surprised, and I asked them what I should do. Deja was like, don't do anything. If you do, your family is going to fall apart. Alice butts in and just tells Deja to shut up. She was like, yo, you got another sister. Don't you want to know who she is? I replied, no. Alice was like, you should tell your mom. Deja was saying no, and they was just arguing back and forth whether or not if I should say anything. Come back for part 4.